January 11th, and want to wish everyone a happy new year and anybody who's streaming online. Happy New Year to you also. At this particular time, we'd like to do attendance roll call.
Oh, wait, here it comes.
Are you still at home?
No, I think we're good. Alright. So real quickly, attendance roll call, we do have Mr. Blunt, we have Commissioner Myers, we have Ms. Higgins, and we have Committee Chair, Commissioner Fisher, with, Dr. Thomas being the only one absent thus far. So we have a quorum and we're ready to go.
All right, thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of our previous meeting dated November 2nd, 2023?
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved, and stated in second. Do I have all approved and opposed? And so we have been approved and accepted. Our next agenda item is FY 24 audit work plan activity.
All right, well, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Wanted to take this time, I know we decided not to meet as a group over the holidays, and so it's been since November, and a lot of activity has taken place since then. Both Judy and Katie, who are here today, have been working diligently on a lot of things, and I'm very thankful for their efforts, and I think you will be too at the next meeting, when you see some of the product that they put together. But just to recap, we met before the actual work plan was formally approved by the mayor and commission on November 7th. So they did do that. I believe it was a unanimous vote. And then I also had the opportunity on November 16th to go over in a little bit more detail the approved work plan at a work session meeting with the full commission. And all of that said, I think the feedback was positive. One thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, it wasn't as though we weren't going to address it. We were always planning to do so, but I think it was reiterated by one of the commissioners during that time, is to make sure during the periodic audits that we are considering also the physical space in which some of these departments operate. Their floor space, how their office is equipped, what sort of dynamic is there with the ratio of staff to square footage, and are they outgrowing their space and things like that. So we have incorporated those items into our periodic audits as well. So that's just a recap of the work plan approval. And then once that was approved by the mayor and commission, we got to work the next day. We started off, as we told you last time, with the human resources and the tax assessor's office audit. So one comprehensive audit, which was expected to take, about 6 months. So we went ahead and got preliminary planning going on that. And that's what we're highlighting here today, is that the requested material has been received by our office from HR already. They had about a month and a half to sort of gather some documents that we had needed to do our analysis, and they've gotten that back to us. During that time, we've also sent out some of the staff questionnaires to their staff, sort of polling based on the scope of the audit, and we're starting to see those come in as well. And then we also went ahead and reached out to select departments within the government that obviously work with HR on recruitment, hiring, and orientation, and we've sent out a survey to them as well, and we're starting to get that feedback as well. So that's where we are with the HR audit. We also made contact with them regarding the fieldwork phase. We have that schedule approved between the two departments, and that is set to occur next month in February, where we'll be spending a lot of time over at the HR department working with them. So HR is off to a good start, but we all know that one is more of the longer game, and will probably still wrap up first in June, but it was important to get that planning phase taken care of. With regard to the tax assessor's office, I'm happy to report that we did some of the same actions initially in November with them, where we requested information, we sent out staff surveys. That was completed. We also completed our field work phase with the tax assessor last month, where we spent a good amount of time in their office and with their staff. Judy and Katie actually went out on, in the field with, some of the assessors. And so we've wrapped that phase up. This week, we intend to finish our draft. We will be meeting with, the tax assessor next week to sort of have our exit conference with them, give them a taste of the first draft, make sure we're all on the same page with some of the factual data. And if that's the case, then we hope to bring that draft to you all at your February meeting for initial consideration. The way that this will likely work out in accordance with our standards and our timeline is at the time that you receive the draft in preparation for your February meeting, that will also be the time in which the manager and the tax assessor's office will sort of get that final draft as well. And that initiates the clock for their 30-day response review. And our hope then is to have any modifications to the draft, as well as the response from management and the department, all wrapped into one final draft for you all to consider and hopefully approve in March then. So that is where we are at with the tax assessor's audit. And then the other two, both economic development and HCD, we have sent out those notices to each of those departments. We are meeting with economic development next week to have their entrance conference and sort of kick off that audit. We've already requested information from them, and same with HCD, although we're still not intending to start that one until maybe March, April. We've at least notified them formally, and they've been able to start working on some of the information we've requested ahead of time. So that is where we are with the work plan so far. And do y'all have any questions? Oh, real quickly, we did incorporate into your packet the timelines that we produced, and these were actually shared at the entrance meetings with both the tax assessor and the human resources department, indicating sort of the workflow that we would be doing internally with them. And as I said, the tax assessor's timeline is pretty much on track, and we've accomplished the majority of those steps. And I think we're also on track with human resources from what we've provided. So if you have any questions about that, let me know.
Granted, it's early in the process, but how are things going? Any observations?
Yeah, so I think with regard to the periodic audit of the tax assessor, which that has been the majority of our time right now, I think it's been going well. Certainly as a group, we've learned internally things that we can do differently for the next go around, you know, from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint. But when you look at the objective and the scope of that particular type of audit, which we all discussed was meant to be a sort of a touch base, I think it's going well just to observe what they do on a daily basis, document some of their operations, their performance, take a look at the books. And I think it's gone well. Their cooperation has been great. We've had an opportunity to meet with the vast majority of staff and talk with them and see what they do. And at the very least, I think, regardless of any recommendations that may come about, I think the hope of the periodic audit is to at least provide an educational glimpse into what the departments do. And so there will certainly be that critique potentially at the end of each one where we say, okay, here's a couple things we observed that, you know, we'd like you to consider or change. But we can even vouch for the fact that working in the government, we were educated ourselves on some of the daily interactions that they have as a department that we were not aware of. And so we felt educated, and I think at the very least, our document will at least provide a better glimpse for the public as to what a tax assessor's office does aside from just assessing properties. And there is certainly more to it than that. So we're looking forward to releasing that to y'all soon.
Ungathered. I know you had said, especially tax assessors audit, but you're gonna share this with the manager and with the tax assessor being the elected official. And it's the reason why we're sharing it with the manager and that one.
Well, so it is interesting, and because the tax assessor, well, the chief appraiser Not necessarily elected, but appointed by the Board of Assessors.
Right.
Which in turn is appointed by you all as a commission. So no elections per se. And it's important to remember that they are independent to a degree, but obviously still fall within the realm of Athens-Clarke County as a government. You all are responsible for approving their budget annually. And then, every 6 years, as the terms expire, you as a commissioner are also in charge of appointing those Board of Assessor members. So, from a budgetary standpoint, I think it's important to include the manager's office, though I will say the manager was clear up front at our, entrance meeting about his role in the tax assessor's office. And certainly open to any suggestions that, he would have the authority or influence of, depending on what is found as part of the audit. So I think as a matter of practice, we'll include the manager, in some of those findings because of a budgetary standpoint. But I don't expect, and I haven't had any significant conversations with management about the actual audit itself or any kind of influence or questions about what's going on. I think they primarily understand that that is more of the Board of Assessors.
Yeah,
So,
but I see about the human resources reports.
yes, that's
I
correct.
see that manager getting that, but I was just a little, I don't want to know why they would include that.
And to your point, Commissioner, too, there is a role within the manager's office, and I believe it's the assistant to the manager, that is the liaison for that, for our management's office, with the tax assessor's office. So they do play an informal or indirect role in some of the oversight and act as a liaison in a way. So that's part of it as well.
And your auditing process, normally the managers included that just in general in the template for the audit process for processing the reports. He's in that, this might be an exception, of course, because of the mechanics of the, yeah.
Correct. And I think the distinguishing factor that Commissioner Fisher was also alluding to is if it was a purely elected official, say, for example, the sheriff's office, the manager would have less of a role in that workflow, to the point where although we could skip that part of it, I don't know if we would, but I think the lines are clearly drawn that, that would tend to lean more towards that constitutional officer and their response solely, so. But.
And do you feel that you've identified, any internal control issues that the mechanics of identifying, the mechanics of internal control?
Yeah, so we did apply, there is a section within our report actually that is focused on internal controls. Based on the Green Book standards, we addressed the 5 categories of internal controls with environment, control activity, risk assessment, monitoring, things like that. So we did apply that as we were out in the field, and we did assess that from a broad perspective. And it wasn't solely on a financial side of things. It was also from a performance and compliance side. So we tried to bring our own unique approach to internal controls, but we did apply those standards. And so.
The tax assessor's office, of course, they're very sensitive from the public anyway. For that
Yes,
stuff, right?
yes, yeah. So, if any, of those issues result in, concern or recommendations, they'll certainly be addressed in our report, from the internal control standpoint as well. So,
Right.
yes. But that's essentially where we're at right now, is we're assessing all of that data, all of our field work, internally putting it together within a report, and we'll have that ready for you all the next time we meet.
Any other questions to Gavin, HR or FSS, anything?
Just one
Yeah.
note, so we did have that, communication from, a member of the public through on the email, and you directed him, of course, to the appropriate one.
Yes,
It's interesting that you got that right about the same time that you were doing.
sure,
So
sure.
the management of those kind of communications, I suppose, was there anything back that?
There was not, I don't believe I really received a response, or another question, but I think it's natural that as we talk in these meetings and come out with an annual work plan, and there are certain departments that are, you know, obviously highlighted in those efforts, that there will be an interest, a natural interest from the public about what it exactly we're looking at, or what our role is, and what our responsibility is. And so I'm happy as we continue to go along any of those communications that we receive as a group. I'll certainly reach out to you all if as appropriate, but I'll be happy to otherwise field some of those responses and sort of direct people in the right direction. That if it's not something within the purview of our audit, I'll explain that to them in my response and direct them to the appropriate authority for that. So, yeah.
Thank you. E, that you all was, did E combine together with your internal audit updates, are you good on that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and ease a bit of a larger thing for my internal audit update, but we'll touch upon a lot of topics there. So the first one, just a reminder regarding the ethics training, obviously. I think we kind of have till the end of the month to sort of complete that. So kindly do that. If you have any questions, reach out to us, or if there's any technical issues, Judy's fantastic at working at those, so we'll be glad to help you with that. Website maintenance, I know that was talked about the last time we met, just sort of in general with our government web pages, but you know, specifically the ones that we have control over. Katie spent some time with our website for operational analysis in Peace Cobb, and we've now listed the audits that are in progress. For example, human resources and tax assessors. We've kept probably the last 3 or 4 years of audits that were completed. You can find the reports there and click on those as well. And then obviously all of y'all as a committee have been listed, your term limits. And then we've provided a direct link from our webpage to the agendas, meetings, and video links as well. So you don't necessarily have to go search for that on the general website. If you're on our webpage, you can click right there, it'll bring you right to it. So with regard to the grand jury research that was mentioned at the last meeting, we did provide that memo for y'all, and there's a link there that will bring up some of the most recent grand jury reports. It links to the clerk of court's website that you're able to read any of those official findings over the last couple of years. But in brief, we've provided the law that sort of governs grand juries with respect to how they look at finances within a government. And really, the law basically states that the grand jury is anticipated to look at 4 specific departments within a government. And sheriff, clerk of courts, the treasurer, which in this realm would be our finance department. And typically that grand jury is tasked with looking at those books in general, sort of the first quarter of the year. And so we don't have an up-to-date one because that's anticipated to occur this first quarter of 2024. And because of COVID, there really wasn't any updated ones, and that was by judicial order that they didn't necessarily have to do over the last couple of years. But we provided a copy of the 2018, which I believe is the most recent one that we have, that they looked at those departments from a financial standpoint. So any questions about that, we're happy to look a little further, but that is a process that is typically, as you know, handled by our courts and our clerk of courts office with respect to the grand jury and their role in that.
So I just want to make a quick comment. So as I was trying to research some of the law on the requirements of the grand jury to satisfy these analysis of certain financial functions. And they reference 36(1)-7, but what I find is actually 3681, as chapter 81 rather than chapter 1, so I have to probably work a little bit harder to see if one or the other is not correct, but the ones that we have here, I think this is more clear. So in looking at 3681, I found just one sentence about the requirement for that, but this one, which is 151271, which I guess is the one, the grand jury duties, which is actually more clear in outlining the functions of what they're supposed to be looking at and how they're supposed to look at it, I suppose.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to mention that because I really struggled with trying to nail down that the statute that covered this requirement. But I do think it's worthwhile to have those grand jury. Of course, you have the link so we can look at it directly.
Sure,
We can
yeah.
always find it directly. But also as a matter of course, that that should be a report that in general should be presented to the audit committee as it's completed every year.
Yeah, and we can work as a group, to, as they are completed annually, and we get access to them, we'll be happy to bring that to you all as a body, for review as well. So, yeah, we can make note of that.
I did see on quite a few, going back probably to 2012, that most of the grand juries were happy to try to satisfy that function, but they didn't feel that they were necessarily qualified to do the analysis on it. So they didn't know how worthwhile that was, what they were doing, because they were not necessarily able to read the financial statements and the financial reports. I do know that the finance officer, because we dealt with this a couple of years ago, did start doing a presentation to the grand jury, trying to explain the financial reports to them to help them.
Yeah,
But there's quite a bit of comments in their grand jury reports to try and be able to do a better job in doing that and satisfying the requirements. So it's a codified requirement, they have to do it, but they want to be effective in how they're doing it. So that's just as an aside,
Yeah.
to see if that can be done better.
all right. A little bit more on the auditor's update. Professional development, I know that was requested last meeting, so we've provided you sort of a spreadsheet of some of our own and staff education, whether that's memberships, training, certifications, things like that, conferences as well. So does anyone have any questions about sort of the training that's been done thus far? And that was current through the end of the year, I believe, so.
The Association of Local Government Auditors, that's a national association?
That is.
Are those local government auditors? Does that focus on more than the form of financial? I mean, I remember like when I went to a ACCG thing on auditing. And I went to that and I was like, oh, this is great, this is gonna help. And then it was like, it's only on financial audits. It has nothing to do with the kind of auditing that we're doing here, so.
What I could say, Commissioner, is I think that still holds true in many sense that, ALGA, the Local Government Association, and then even IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is a worldwide association. I think there tends to be a leaning toward financial auditing for the most part, but both of them do have, classes and do address in some capacity performance and compliance auditing as well. So, both Judy and Katie recently attended a virtual conference for ALGA, and I think they certainly took away a lot of things from it, but more than likely, there were some topics that were heavily on the financial side of things as opposed to the performance. But that's sort of where we are in the profession in general, I think, is that we're slowly branching out into that performance and compliance side and getting away from just strictly forensic financial auditing.
And is one of these the ones where you or someone else in your office going to pursue some sort of certification level?
Yes, the IIA.
That's the bigger one, right?
That's the industry standard
Yeah.
that offers the professional certification, various professional certifications in auditing.
And I think what we need to do, we need to keep in mind, we're a little bit unique when we talk about auditing. Now, a lot of counties don't do what we do. And I think one of the reasons because we are a unified government. So most counties, when we think about audit, it's mostly financial. Whereas in our case, we look at different departments and the overall work that they do and what they producing and things they are providing. So some counties don't have audit department, and I guess I go ahead and say this publicly. I think when the charter was together, it said audit. We may need to go back and revisit our charter, and we may end up. I'm not saying this gonna happen, but we may change the name because they really don't look at the financial piece. What we do. We look at how those departments are operating, or they're providing things for this community, for the county, what we need. So just keep that in mind. So we don't want to get so confused, because we do have you all know, we have an independent auditor that comes in and look at all our finances. We do the outside consultant. So I think, and I didn't think I public, and Gavin and I talked about this before we went live, I think we probably have to go back and really educate our public about what our audit department does and what they provide. So I think those are some things we'll need to really talk about. And again, I think once we review our take a look at what was our charter and what was intended, we may go back and change the title. I don't know. It could say just management organization. So again, I just think, just for the record, we just need to be mindful that the audit department don't just do financial audits. Yeah.
Gavin, on the provider,
Mhm.
what is the CVIOG and the Walters?
Yeah, I'm sorry, and yeah, I could have done a better job of spelling that out. That's my fault. So CVIOG, Carl Vinson Institute of
Oh, Carl
Government,
Vinson, okay.
and then Wolters Kluwer is a consultant and software provider for audit and financial systems. So it is a private company, but a well-known company that offers, as part of
Okay.
their consulting, certain educational opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was surprised to see that the Carl Vincent collects up all the audits for the entire state of Georgia, right?
Yes,
they
from
have
the financial,
Financial audits, right?
side of it, yeah.
I was surprised to see that.
It's amazing.
It's a big job.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really astonishing.
Yeah, they release, annually, they just did it a couple weeks ago, actually, in any annual updated standards for auditing within Georgia. And it's a good piece of material. Again, take it with the caveat, though, that as Commissioner Fisher was just indicating, a lot of it is intended for the financial and the annual financial audits that are done of every government in Georgia, as opposed to some of what we do from a performance standpoint. So, yeah.
Well, we had some discussion about the fact that there is an intersection between the performance part, the compliance part, and the financial part. And that's what, it's kind of astonishing they've become so stovepiped separately, because personally, I don't think that they should be
Yeah.
separate. We have designed the system here in Athens, make the separate auditors, internal auditors offices, operational analysis, even the name, operational analysis, as opposed to financial analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we should, cut the connection between the financial auditing and financial analysis and the performance analysis, because there's a lot of intersection there, right? Especially when it comes to the internal control piece, right? That these are things that have, and the relationship between the internal auditor and the financial auditor should be a good one, right?
Yeah.
That should be something that they really have, developed.
I don't disagree with that, but I will say, not to belabor this point, It has struck me from the beginning of this that it does seem, for lack of a more sophisticated term, weird that it's done exactly like this. You would think there would be, because you would just think these are two, I completely agree, yes, they work side by side. But it seems like it would be two different skill sets
Mhm.
that you would need to,
Right.
to effectively do that.
Mhm.
So I don't know, to have this all kind of congealed together this way does seem a little strange to me.
Yeah,
But most of our financial, actually, the skill set that's needed, I see you saying that the financial stuff has a very specific skill set, right?
Exactly.
But it seems like you all actually are doing more of the stuff that doesn't require the very specialized financial skill set, because that's being done by outside consultants for the most part.
Right.
So they are separate, but we need to be looking at them in this department.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate the fact that, you know, from our role in, between Judy, myself and Katie, you know, we feel very confident in what we can bring to the table. And, as a group, we've decided months ago, you know, one of the goals of our work plan annually is to avoid duplication. And certainly we are mindful of the fact that the government by law has to have an external auditor every year that comes in and does a forensic audit of the books. That said, you know, we feel completely comfortable with our backgrounds in education, also looking at the financial side of departments as we go in there. It may not be a forensic audit to the degree required by law, but it's enough to make sure that, okay, from a budgetary standpoint and from a internal control standpoint and purchasing and procurement, are we where we need to be? And so we do incorporate that, we do look at that, we feel completely comfortable in that realm. But I think also we mesh that with, you know, the performance and the compliance side to give a holistic view of a department as opposed to a, you know, maybe a piecemeal one where we only looked at your financial books regardless of what you have going on a daily routine and operations. You know, I think our goal is to certainly bring all of that into one comprehensive analysis, and I think that's what we've done, and I think you'll see that the next time you meet. So,
But to go back to Commissioner Fisher's point, you know, you may think it's just a matter of semantics, who cares, just move on. I think in this instance, it does matter, because, I mean, if I was in the position of one of these departments and I heard, okay, well, now the auditor's coming, we just did this. Why are we doing this? You know, you just kind of start off on the wrong foot to begin with, because you're right. It's like, just making this up, 80% of it is really an audit on, are you doing your job correctly?
Yeah.
Whereas 20% of it is just really looking at the finance.
Right, right.
Really to just say, okay, the auditor's already done this. Everything looks good. Nothing seems crazy to us. Let's move back over to how you're actually getting your job done. Correct.
Let me go more.
It's more operational. I mean, that's why I say I think. And Commissioner Myers made a agreement. I think somewhere along the line, we as commission have to go back and look at our charter and really understand, when they wrote this or put this together, what they actually wanted that department to be like. And then again, maybe at that time, audit was the right word to put in there, but maybe we'll go back and look and say, maybe we need to name it somewhere, because I think a lot of people in our community look at them more from a financial and not as operational. That's pretty much it.
Instead of, what is the word that I mean, that's why they have that operational analysis. It seems like every time we mention audit, we should put operational audit.
Right.
Yeah.
Operation, like we should just do that automatically. Because there is the audit, you just see dollar bills, right?
Right, exactly.
Just one more comment, though. There is the piece, sometimes I think that accountants really do want to take over the world and they make things so complicated. The financial audits are, you know, a compliance one basically on the accountants and how they follow the rules. And then, of course, the mechanics that it actually matches up, of course, that there's nothing else going on. But that's what the financial audits are. But they're so complex and the reports are relatively complex unless you've got a couple of courses
Mhm.
behind on how to read financial reports, that people kind of say, well, yeah, that we'll leave that to the auditors, we'll leave that to, in our case, the external auditors to
Right.
come and,
Yeah.
but there's a systems piece for the financial auditing part that is not necessarily talking about the reports and the analysis of the numbers that they're in, but the piece on is the financials and the auditing of the financial system, the system itself,
Mhm.
following best practices and what we're trying to do, right?
Yes.
So there are, a million checklists out there. Carl Vinson, of course, puts them out too for things like audit committees. There's checklists for audit committees, what you should be doing, how you should be checking. For the systems part of it, right? Are we designing it and making it so that we can identify the problems and issues? Are we executing it in a way that is
Mhm.
following best practices to avoid the problems that you might have in the execution of the financial compliance component? So I don't think we should completely avoid that as the audit committee. I think that's something in particular that audit committees are designed to do. And the internal auditor and the financial auditor are people that really should work together, especially when it comes time for the external audit. And I know that that's something here that we don't do because we have separated the functions the way we have. It's not bad because this would be able to be more fully developed, the Office of Operational Analysis, if it's a standalone office. And I think that's something that in our government, we prefer to do that because it really gives a value added.
It does.
Yeah.
No, and you're absolutely right, and unfortunately here locally, we had a perfect example of that a couple of years ago in that horrible situation, remember the Greek Light office at the University of Georgia?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Where it just took somebody going, okay, why is this person the only one writing the checks?
Mhm.
Right.
And then that whole thing was exposed.
Right.
And all it takes is, like you're saying,
Right.
Right,
one
right.
person to ask a question.
And that's the piece that should be identified in the
Right,
internal
right.
control. That's the piece that you're separating of duties.
Yes.
And, somebody's checking the bank accounts, that the money's actually going into the accounts that it's supposed to be going to, and the contracting, the risk and the contracting part. So those are things that the internal control program, and that's the financial piece that I think the internal auditor
Yes.
has as a piece of what he's doing. And then for the audit committee, the kind of things like the grand jury reports, like other external, besides the Office of Internal Analysis, that there are other, reports and programs and things. Um, the finance department for Athens contracts the external auditor. And in many cases, in many local communities, audit committees and, or other, external, parties are a party to who and how you select the external auditor for coming in, and then time periods for making sure you're changing over your auditors and things like that. So those are things that might be something we'd be interested in seeing, but I think that's probably another day, another conversation.
Okay, moving on to the FY 25 budget proposal. So I just wanted to bring, general awareness to, what we as a department, put forth to, both the manager and the finance department thus far. We've begun that process. It's a lengthy process. And so, in the coming weeks, I will sit down with management as well as finance to go over what I've proposed, and then eventually that will get forwarded on to the mayor and subsequently the mayor and commission as a whole. So many steps in the process yet, but I wanted you all to at least be aware of where we were coming from as an office. And, real briefly, and keep in mind, this can certainly change as we go through this process. And these are not the final numbers. Those obviously are voted on by our commission, but we have looked at the last 2 to 3 years of the department's budget, and, from a historical standpoint, it's pretty much been the same. Now that we're back in the office and things are operating, it gave us an opportunity to sort of adjust some of those budget line items that haven't been adjusted in 2 to 3 years, for good reason, but, we've found areas where we can, lighten the load a little bit in terms of finances, and then also areas though where we need to incorporate some additional funds. And part of that is the undertaking now of the Public Safety Oversight Commission. That falls within our realm as a department. The budget that is associated with that will need to also fall within our realm and our purview. And so some of those increases in line items from a professional standpoint, a supply standpoint, for example, any stipends that those members might receive, those are all now incorporated within our budget as opposed to random places where they've been the last couple of years. So we've also saw a significant decrease, we think, in some previous purchases that were made that are no longer needed. And so we did propose a general decrease in our operating from years past that will be coupled though with what's ultimately an increase, an overall increase based on two new initiatives when we look at staffing and professional services. So that's the proposal that we've made this year. And like I said, there's still some talks to be had about it, and where it all lands, we'll keep you updated, but that's where we are thus far.
Popping into my head, was the savings associated, there was like some software or
Correct.
something? Okay.
Yeah, so we took the last couple months to give a trial period to an existing software program that was purchased years ago. And I've talked with the consultant that operates it, we've looked at it, bringing on board both Judy and Katie and some of their background and skills with other software programs. We felt like this one in particular didn't necessarily justify the continued cost, and so.
Because it was a fairly exorbitant amount of money.
It was, and so, we're going to continue, using technology to the best of our ability. That's certainly important, but we're gonna use it in different avenues that are more cost efficient, I think, so,
Is that where most of the savings was then?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Given the changes of the last 3 years, which we're all very aware of, yes, it would be weird if there weren't.
Yeah.
Some pretty
Yeah, so
changes.
I think the software is the majority, but then, certainly we add on the responsibility for 2 boards for a full staff. Now, there are slight increases in other line items, training, supplies, things like that, that weren't thought of the last couple of years, obviously, but, of that savings in software, we've been able to then translate at least 50% of that into actual savings. We put the other 50 into other line items that needed to be increased. And, that will help offset some of the other asks, in terms of staffing. It won't be a 1-for-1, but certainly we did our best internally to try and trim down line items where needed, on that side of things. So, all right. Okay, and then lastly, as part of the internal auditor's update, just an update on the Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board and our work with them. I provided an attachment. As requested, it kind of indicates some of the average hours that we, as a staff, spend on strictly Peace Corps related items, and I would say we're doing our best to keep track of our hours. More than likely, this is a little bit under what it probably is in reality. But keep in mind that we weren't assigned the oversight of Peace Corps until August. And even so, those first 3 months, the first quarter, it was me that was performing those duties. And then as things sort of upticked, we brought on board both Katie and Judy. And what you see there is primarily administrative tasks, because from a timeline standpoint, Peace Corps is in a great place. I commend them for their productivity thus far, but they were waiting for a staff. And we've now gotten to the point just recently where we've initiated some of their processes and procedures, and they're out in the open, and we're going to be dealing with that coordination, but a lot of that hasn't taken place yet for these first 6 months. So when you talk about processing complaints and things like that, none of that is reflected in these numbers. These numbers are strictly from an administrative, preparing for meetings, dealing with questions, customer service sort of side of things, so.
Kevin,
Yeah.
I went onto the website, it looked to me like the complaint form is up there.
It is.
Is that up and running?
It is.
Have you received anything through this?
Not at the moment,
How long has it been up and running?
since the end of November.
Okay,
So, now that said, it was a sort of a soft trial run at the end of November. We first briefed the board about it in early December, that it was up and running, and we did that because we wanted to make sure, A, they were aware of it, and B, there weren't any, hiccups, in it, but it has been active, and technically, yes, if a complaint is filed, we would be receiving and processing one as of right now, so,
and that goes to, when that's submitted, it comes to you?
yes. It comes to our office, as the first step in the process, and there will be, administrative work that happens with receiving a complaint, verifying that it's complete, responding to the complainant that we've received it and that this is the process going forward, and then distributing it to the public safety agencies for their review and consideration before it is brought back to the board for any sort of review and action therefore. But those processes and procedures are in place. We've done all that. But certainly as complaints come in, there will be that shift in workload to actually do and follow through with all of those processes.
And in terms of workload,
Mhm.
as much as anything here, is there, obviously if there's a form, but no one knows about it, keeps the work low. So is there a plan to do some outreach about the availability of this form so that we can know? I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of staffing and, in terms of knowing how much this would impact the office.
Sure. So, again, we did a soft opening of the form for 2 weeks, but it was publicly announced early December at the board meeting with Peace Cobb. They were all made aware of it. I know that after that meeting, they actually left that meeting stating how they were going to essentially outreach and advertise themselves. It's been up publicly on our webpage for about a month and a half, and they do intend, I believe, going into the new year as part of their work plan to conduct some more outreach events in which they will certainly highlight the complaint form itself. But
Is our public information office, there's a lot of times there's a new, like if we're getting a survey for a new project, there's one of those blurbs that come up in the rotation. Is the information office planning on doing anything to highlight that it exists?
I don't know that for certain as of right now, that I don't believe that's occurred, and quite honestly, I think that would be at the direction of Peace Cobb, is as a board, if they asked us to do something. I know that they wanted to take, at least from the conversations I've heard, that they wanted to sort of take some initiative with their outreach and go that route first, but certainly if there's anything additional that we can do that they're requesting, we'll be happy to talk with them about it. And I know they've also decided to publish a survey, a community survey as well, bringing attention to complaints in Peace Cobb, and we're just waiting again for their okay to go ahead and release that as well. So, but to answer your question, yes, I mean, if there's additional things that we can do to make it known, we'll be happy to. But we did also brief all 4 of the public safety agencies as well. They're well aware of the fact that the complaint form went live. They've been aware of the process. We asked them to consider also providing a link essentially through their own web pages to the complaint form. That's we're still waiting to see where they land on that. That's sort of a decision that some of those constitutional officers can make with regard to their own website and whether they want to provide a direct link to it. Yeah, I mean, I think we've tried our best to, at least with the direction that we've been given by the board, make things available, so.
And we're meeting, cause I'm an ex officio on that board, so we're meeting on the 24th. At 5:30, so that'll be our next meeting. I'm almost sure they're gonna bring up about the outreach they're gonna be doing moving forward. It'll be our first meeting of the year. Yeah.
I wanted just to make a quick comment on the form itself. So I did notice that they called it the complaint, and compliment form. But there's nothing in the form for compliments.
Well, I think just the general, there is a general
I'm gonna make sure
area
you
that.
that compliment section.
So, I think it is fair, that is a name that they came up with, or that they agreed to anyway. I think it was to balance the fact that.
To have input, have positive input.
Both positive and
Yeah,
negative.
right. No, that
And,
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, although I agree with you, the vast majority of the form is tailored from a legal perspective to somebody filing a complaint, because we have to ask certain questions and gain certain information. There is a general area that you could, indicate a compliment if you wanted to.
I think they should make two different forms if they're just
Sure.
advice, and you can put them right next to one another. If somebody really wants to make, most of the people want to complain when things are really bad, and every once in a while when things are really good, they will do, yeah.
And, one last thing I'll just say about that is, there's the formal aspect of complaints, which that form, and there is that process. That's not to say we have not been involved with informal, complaints. And, we have been working with the public safety agencies as well as Peace Corps as sort of a mediator in between some of these informal complaints that we've received. There's not a lot of them, but there were a few. And that still, obviously takes some staff time and dedication to that as well. But, that's incorporated into some of those numbers that you see there right now, so. Okay. Okay, and that is the internal auditor's update.
Thank you, Gavin. Any other questions of Gavin? Or staff? Is there anything, our next meeting is scheduled for February 1st. Is there anything that the committee would like to have Gavin, put on the agenda? Next meeting? And, we had talked about initially maybe missing a month, but we're not gonna miss now based on information that we got today. We'll go ahead and meet. There'll be a lot more information flowing in now. Some decisions that we're gonna have to make and go to the mayor and commission. So we're gonna go ahead and meet. So February 1st is our next, meeting.
Did I understand then that on this first, audit on the human sources, the tax assessor audit?
Yes,
That you're gonna be bringing us a draft of that,
correct.
and that we'll have that beforehand?
Yes, so
on-
the intent will be, as usual, about a week beforehand.
Yeah.
For the February meeting, you'll get the standard email you do from me. It should include hopefully a draft, if not, maybe a day or two later, but
Okay.
we're working hard to get it to y'all. For that meeting in February, we don't expect you to take a vote. But I do expect some good discussion about
Right,
the findings. We'll certainly take into consideration any, thoughts that you may have, and while that is happening throughout the month of February is also when it has been delivered to the manager's office and the department itself. And so we'll be expecting their official responses, and we'll incorporate those into yet another final draft of that same document that you're gonna see in February, but with updated responses from them, and that will be the one in March that you'll be expected to vote on at that point, so.
and when would the human resource audit is,
That's the long one.
That's a long,
right,
yeah.
but when is that one expected on this thing, final report?
June, more than likely.
Yeah, in summer.
Well, that's to the mayor and commission, but when would the draft be to us before it goes back?
Yeah, I mean, more than likely, you'll see a draft maybe in June. and, or at least the first draft in June. But, you know, we aren't expecting that one to get voted on by the mayor and commission until the July, maybe even August
Okay.
cycle. But in between that, we're hoping then you'll have another 2 periodic audits, essentially the economic development one sometime in the spring. And then right around the same time as human resources is wrapping up, we should also be wrapping up the HCD one as well.
Great.
So, yeah. And then we'll be talking about a FY25 work plan thereafter. So for the whole new list. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm eager to see this first, you know, periodic one, so we can see the format and how it all works together. That'll make it all a lot more real.
Yeah, and I'll just, I mean, real briefly, without getting into it, I'm impressed by obviously the work that both Rudy and Katie have put into this document. I think, from just a product standpoint, they have something to be proud of. And knowing that obviously what the content shows and findings and recommendations will all be critiqued, that's just a given going forward. But, I think the document itself is shaping up nicely. And, you know, just to keep in mind that we have 3 more of these just this year, fiscal year alone. We are certainly open to recommendations and comments. But even if it's not something that changes with this first draft, we can certainly look to the next one to incorporate some changes and things like that. So we can maintain our schedule, still take into consideration any of your concerns and keep moving forward.
These first versions of these things, though, they're the most important ones you're ever gonna do.
Yeah.
Because whether or not you, and I'm sure you would take any input, you know, and tweak things, those become your roadmaps.
Yes.
Right.
So you wanna make real sure you get those as good as they can be.
Yes.
And I assume from these periodic ones, and this is just like, you know, there'll be, if there'll be a chance to review it for like, some little red flags or something like, oh, listen, this one needs a more thorough one. Or no, I think this is fine in the periodic stage.
Yeah.
So that will give us more information about where to go as we move forward.
There will be a conclusion section that indicates whether any separate
Right.
audits would be required in the future.
Right.
I think, you know, to keep in mind that we will try as an office to come to you well in advance during a process of an audit if we feel like the scope itself needs to be tweaked and changed as part of the current audit. At the end of the day, though, if we haven't done that for y'all, what we'll try to do to again, wrap up what we've already done and prevent and, try to prevent anyway, a scenario where we've completed an audit. You all have some interest in possibly looking at something that came from the audit. And although that's certainly within your recommendation to suggest, well, let's not close this one, let's reopen it and look at it for what this topic is. I think our preference would be to close the audit. Here's an idea for future consideration, and we can undertake that as a separate project and then go about it that way. But obviously that's up for discussion amongst the group. So, but yes, we will include that section as well.
Great.
Any other questions? Okay,
Motion to adjourn?
I'm just gonna say that. Second.
Second.
The motion to adjourn is at 10:46. It's been, noted and stated with the second. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
All right, thank you all. Appreciate your help.
You guys